Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Every Wednesday, we talk about some of the things that might be impacting you from a economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, potentially, or from a just a local standpoint. Some of the issues you might want to be aware of, some of the things that are going on that may impact you here locally. So it's a community participation program. I hope it's a community service. I hope people get something out of it, but it's also one that you can participate in. 772-220-9788. Again, 220-9788. That's also 220-WSTU. And we welcome any comments or calls. The show is not a financial planning show, although we get into some issues that hopefully could make you or save you some money, but it's not designed for that. It's really a program to talk about some of the things that are going on in the world globally or in the United States, and how that might affect you here in Stuart, or even what's happening in Stuart, what the impact might be here. Last week we talked a little bit about some of the things that were going on, some of the rentals that were coming on in the city of Stuart, and some of the impact that might have on housing and jobs for the city. Good things, bad things, but today I think with what we've got going on now with the transition in the White House, it's probably good to talk about what that's going to mean economically, and some of the things that you might want to look at. I've a couple things. We're starting to now get a little bit better idea of what the Biden administration is going to propose is going to propose as alternatives or as legislation or even just executive orders. Some of the things they're going to do. Some of that is political. Some of it, but even the political stuff does have an economic impact and has an effect. So there are going to be some conflicting. There's some conflicting things that are economically going to be conflicted from an ability to get some things done. For example, even though these are not political, they are. I mean, are political. They're also economic. If we have a large inflow of labor from outside the country, regardless of where that's going to come from and where that immigration is going to come from. Right now, we're looking at it, and it's coming from, looks like it's coming from Central America and some of the areas there, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and in those areas. It's interesting. Not as much of that comes from Mexico anymore, because Mexico now with the treaty we have and other things, they kind of have the ability to generate a lot of relatively high-paying jobs in their own country. The reason we had such an exodus from Mexico for such a long time is that there was no ability to generate any income. Now, you still got the problem with drugs and with cartels and other issues in Mexico that are making it very difficult and make it very difficult to go to Mexico. But regardless of that, a lot of this immigration is not necessarily coming from there. It's coming through there, but it's coming from, like I said, the Central American locations. Most of that labor is going to be cheap labor or introductory labor, if you want to call it that. Even if they're skilled, even if you have skilled people, and we have this all the time, where we have people come to the United States and they have a skill. They might be a doctor. They might be whatever, and an engineer, but they're not licensed to practice in the United States. So many times they take a job that would be beneath the pay scale that they normally would get paid, because they're not licensed for that. So we're going to see that's the same concept. Like I say, when you have mass immigration coming in from the South, you're going to have people there who may have had much higher skill levels, but are going to be forced to take lower price jobs, lower cost jobs. Now, at the same time, the administration is proposing a increase in the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, which means that everybody, that means that the minimum wage in the United States will be $15 an hour. So what you have is a number of people who are going to now be competing for that $15 an hour job. Economics is all about supply and demand. If we've got way more people competing for that $15 an hour, then there is going to be a reduction in price. You say, well, how can there be a reduction in price? The minimum is $15. You're right. So when we talk about a reduction in price, what we're talking about is a reduction of jobs. Either some of those jobs will be mechanized, but most likely what will happen is many of those jobs will be turned into part-time or into temporary, so that they can get around the benefits, they can get around the pay, and other things. So many of those jobs may turn out to be piecemeal jobs, or jobs that you have to earn, that you get paid by how much you produce. So it's going to cause pressure, downward pressure on labor cost, on jobs, and it's going to, because there'll be a lot of people that want them, and but because the business is forced into a certain minimum, they're not going to be able to expand like they normally would, by taking advantage of that lower cost labor. So which also means that the price of products goes up. As we've talked about before on the show, uh, labor, taxes, all of those things are costs that the business cannot absorb. It has to pass it along. In the small business, they tend to end up absorbing, in the short run, they tend to absorbing some of that cost, but they can't do that in the long run because they'll be out of business. So ultimately, again, just to kind of recap what we've talked about before. Economically, I'm not talking about anything else. Economically, a business has certain costs. That's what the business is made up of, and its costs are its labor, its materials, its profit. You say, well, profit is basically a cost of capital. So there is a cost of capital. If I'm going to keep my money in a business, or if somebody's going to put their money in a business, they need to get a return on that. Otherwise, they will put it in another business where they do get a return. So the return represents a cost of capital. It's another cost that you have. Taxes are a cost, and that cost has to be covered. It can't be passed on to the owners, because if it is, that reduces the return on the capital. So that means that the cost of capital, it's not going to go down. Let me put it that way. It's not going to, because it has to stay consistent with market value. So at some point in time, when everything is basically, from an economic standpoint, everything is then based on those costs. So you price at the total of those costs. That's what it amounts to. If those costs change, then you have to do one of two things. You have to eliminate one of those. You have to eliminate one of those costs, or reduce one of those costs. So, for example, if your taxes go up, then you have to reduce something else. You have to reduce material costs, and that's a possibility. So, if I'm a business that has said in the past that I'm going to buy American, which has a higher cost to it because labor costs are higher in the United States than in other places, if I'm going to buy American, I may now have to not buy American. I may need to buy from someplace else that's cheaper, where the labor's cheaper, like China, for example. So that's one alternative. And so that's what's going to happen. I may, like many of the fast food restaurants have done and others, I may shift. I may try to reduce my human labor cost by increasing productivity through the use of different types of machinery or artificial intelligence. That's happening on a regular basis. Regular jobs that used to be jobs that were handled by a large number of people. Now, with artificial intelligence, it eliminates a lot of those people that are necessary. And instead, you've got the one time cost or the small maintenance cost on the artificial intelligence versus the long term cost of the and the broader cost of the labor. So that is what is going to happen. That's the alternative. So, but in general, we've already done a lot of that. I mean, the pandemic messed a lot of it up, but we've done a lot of that already, and most businesses already do that. You're not going to pay more than for labor than you. I mean, you're not going to pay more for materials than you need to. So you're always going to try to maximize your return on investment by saving as much as you can or cutting down your material cost. You're always going to try to cut down your labor cost if you can. Um, but at some point, you may not be willing to spend the money on artificial intelligence or equipment that increases productivity, because that's a large upfront cost. It's a large sunk cost up front. So unless you know for sure you're going to commit to that route, and we've been on a borderline now where many businesses are looking at artificial intelligence, and they're looking at robotics and other things, and they can implement it. They know they can implement it, and they know that it will work. I mean, it's not like it's in the early stages where people are talking about, yeah, we can get somebody that looks like the maid in the Jetsons, and she can come out with your food at the restaurant. Well, no, we're not talking about that. But we are talking about technology that they know does work. But what stopped it at this point is probably two things. One, there's a large capital investment that's needed up front on that. Yes, there's tremendous savings in the long run, but it is multiple year savings. And most Wall Street businesses in particular, the CEO is rewarded on immediate earnings, not long-term earnings. So they're not going to take that bite unless financially they're going to recoup it in a fairly short period of time. And up to now, there hasn't been really a need to do that. But with a mandatory $15 minimum wage, you have a huge incentive to eliminate that by mechanizing. And it's kind of funny because already you're seeing the restaurants do that. That was probably one of the easier places and one of the stark consequences of what we're talking about with minimum wage. You go into a McDonald's, you go into a Wendy's, and you look around, and in the past, there were a bunch of people in there. There were 2 or 3 people behind the counter, 2 or 3 people back putting together the burgers and cooking the fries, somebody running the drive-through. All of that was being done. And so it was all and so there was a lot of jobs there. And then because you had that many people, you had to have a manager or an assistant manager. You had long hours, so somebody's opening, somebody's closing. So you're not paying overtime to people, and that's the way it was. And it was never intended to be a job that was a permanent job to raise your family and support your family. That's not what that job was about. It was a second job. It was a high school job. It was a part-time job. It was a first job. It was a learning job, a job where you learned how to be a manager, how you learned to be an assistant manager. There are a large number of franchise owners in the McDonald's area and in other areas that are Latino or are African American. They got their start by working there, learned the job, went to Hamburger U and all of that kind of thing, and became owners. And they saved up the money. They got the money to get a down payment. They bought a franchise, and they became owners. And then they bought another one, and then they bought another one, and they became relatively wealthy. And that's and it was and had that been a $15 an hour job when they were doing it, they would not be wealthy today. They would never have. They wouldn't have been wealthy as a result of McDonald's, probably, because they wouldn't have learned what they need to learn. They wouldn't have learned how to manage people and how to do all of those kind of things. They probably wouldn't have learned those and knew that they had an ability to do it. So so what's happening already is that that's happening. That the businesses are now realizing that the savings on this is going to be shorter term now, and so they're starting to make adjustments. What have they done? They've got kiosks in a lot of the places. You walk in, you don't have to go up to the counter anymore. You only have to go to the counter if you're paying cash. You go in and you pick out what you want. You know, special orders don't upset you. You can pick and choose whatever you want, and you order it, and it goes to the back, and they give you a number, and you take the number to your table, and then a little while later, somebody shows up with your food. If you're paying with a debit card, you pay right at that time, or credit card, you pay right at the time that you order. And then you go sit down and you wait for your food to come, and somebody brings your food out. So now, if you pay cash right now, there's they're having people take cash, but that we know can go away pretty quickly, right? There we can pay with cash at Home Depot. We can pay with cash at Walmart. So obviously, paying with cash isn't going to be an issue before too long. That's just a minor modification. That's something that I'm surprised they haven't done already. But the other, so we don't need the people behind the counter any longer. Now the question is, well, what happens with the back area, the cooking area? Right now, we still may have 2 or 3 people that are doing the cooking. That won't be necessary. They've got robots now that can do that, artificial intelligent robots that can do that. So what we'll be looking at in the store of the future with, and we're going to be getting there pretty quick at a $15 minimum wage, is we will be looking at 2 people in the location, most likely. We will be looking at, and it may be 3, but not all at the same time. So we'll be looking at probably just 2 in the location normally, and there'll be 2. Why? Well, probably to avoid security problems, having somebody be there by themselves. Now they won't really probably have any access to cash, because the cash will be in a facility similar to an ATM, and somebody would have to haul in a truck and haul it away probably. But basically, they won't want to put people in that position that somebody might think they have cash. And so there'll probably be 2, at least at opening and at least at closing, when it's before hours or after hours. But and you'll probably have 2. You'll have to have 2 or maybe 3 people total, because somebody's got to be there. A human has probably got to be there most of the hours, at least initially, and so that's too many hours for one person. Now, they may choose to pay. They may choose to pay one person 15 hours and let them work overtime, and that. But when you're cutting out 5 positions, at $12 an hour, you're saving $60 an hour, versus 15 or 20. So you can see what's going to happen there. Labor's gone. In fact, I kind of, I've mentioned this before. I think I kind of grew up in the Midwest, and grew up in cattle country in the Midwest, and all of that, and grain and beans and all that. And my grandfather, my great grandfather, and my grandfather were stockbrokers, but they weren't stock as in corporate stockbrokers. They were stockbrokers as in livestock brokers. That's what they did for a living. And a lot of cattle went through Peoria, Illinois. It was a big area for moving cattle. In fact, it was bigger than Chicago, bigger than Kansas City for a while in terms of the amount of livestock that were moved through Peoria. And but I always kind of it's kind of morbid, but I always kind of wondered if the cattle, as they're being walked up to what amounts to the slaughterhouse, if it ever dawns on them that that's where they're going, right? Gee, is what? Wow, where are we going? Oh, this is fun. This is fun. This is fun. Oh, no, it's not. Well, you kind of I kind of wonder the same thing, frankly, about the people that are continuing to work in McDonald's or Taco Bell or Wendy's. When they see that kiosk there, does that thought come into their mind? Wait a minute, this is my death knell as an employee. I'm going to be gone. Just as a note, if you happen to be in in that position right now, I would suggest you look for something else. I Because even the management position at that point probably will pay decent money, but there won't be much future in it because you're not supervising anybody except basically a bunch of robots. So so that's where we're going. That's what's going to have to happen. So this is the economics of the changes that are being made. You can hope something else is going to happen. You could hope that everybody will just get a raise and the company will not do anything. That is not what is going to happen economically. It can't happen. And that's what I'm trying to get people to understand. You can want and want and want and want, but economics is what it is. And that's what's going to happen. It's because it's the only thing that can happen. It's the only way that it works. The only way that that doesn't happen is if you move to pure communism or pure socialism. And then at that point, somebody says, you get paid this much for this job. You have to have this job. You can't get rid of it. And you get paid whether you show up or not. Okay. If we get that far, yes, but then everybody will have that kind of job. Everybody there in Cuba, for example, my favorite example, there are different people making different money there. Everybody makes the same amount of money except the people that are calling the shots. They make a lot of money. They make a lot of money, and they have a lot of benefits. They don't live the same as the people that they're helping to convert to the communism that they love over there. No, and they all get paid the same. So you're a doctor, you get paid the same thing as if you're happen to be the person sweeping the factory at night. That was the first job in Caterpillar when I was a kid. That's the job everybody wanted because it paid $10 an hour. And this was in the 70s. Wow. But anyway, so actually, I think it paid $20 an hour. But anyway, so that's what we're looking at, people. That's kind of why we have to look at some of the stuff, because that is what is going to happen unless the government steps in and takes over. Now, that may be, and then that will be a different form of government than capitalism, than free enterprise, and so therefore, things economically will change, not for the better, because it doesn't mean that you have more money. You don't. In fact, productivity goes down, which then means that labor costs have gone up. And so at that point, you actually are producing a higher cost product, which is now non-competitive. And so it ultimately what it does is it reduces your return on capital. Capital flees. Why do you think when countries go socialist or communist, there is a huge exodus of capital? What kind of capital is there an exodus of first? Well, actually, intellectual capital goes first. Those people who are entrepreneurs, know how to make money, and have made money, they go first, because they're the easiest to get out. It's hard to get money out of a country that's going communist or socialist, but you can get yourself out sometimes. And once you get yourself out, you're carrying that intellectual capital with you. So that is what goes. About the same time, but probably not as quickly because it's knocked down and held down, is financial capital. All of the wealthy move, and they leave the country. And they get out early and they go. And it's kind of funny that and so what really happens is the people that typically the socialists and communists are hoping to take advantage of, the people who are wealthier, that have the intellectual ability to create new jobs and and create technologies and all those kind of things, those people vanish. So now all of a sudden what you've got left are those people who can't get out, who don't have or don't have the resources. They're the lower level of the economy, typically the lower working class or the poor, and they just get poor. And that's what happens unless you make the pot bigger everybody gets poorer. And the only way to do that, to make the pot bigger, is to have the market dictate the efficiency and effectiveness of your production. And that doesn't happen in a socialistic system. In a communistic system, it's dictated by the government. Um, for example, I have a client that's in China. They were first of all, they had to be partners with the Chinese government. So that's always kind of an interesting process. But second of all, the Chinese don't care about whether or not you make a profit. They don't care about that. They care about only a couple things. One, how much they get paid. The person that's ruling and that's dictating, how much do they get paid? And they usually get paid a lot. And then the other issue is, are they going to keep everybody happy? Are they going to create jobs that people can go and do something so that they can produce something, so they have some productivity out of their economy, so that they have something to sell, so that they can get money in to be able to support all the people that they're trying to support. So as a result, they don't care if the investor loses money. Investors care, so they're not going to do that. So, my client was building plants over there for a product that was needed but not understood. The market hadn't developed yet. So the Chinese government's philosophy was, we don't care, just keep building. Well, eventually they said, look, we've already built 2 of these plants. We're not making any money. We're not going to build any more. And in fact, we're going to discontinue that, not even build the 3rd plant. The 2nd plant, we're going to dismantle and stop, because it's losing money. So the Chinese government wasn't happy about that, frankly. And then the 3rd plant, the Chinese government decided to come in and build a university where the plant was. Now, in the United States, the government has the ability of eminent domain, where they can take your property, if it is required for the good of the government, basically. Is now where it's been interpreted. So they can take your property, but they have to pay you fair market value. In the United States, they still have the ability to take your property, which is unfortunate, and that ability has gotten broader over the years. But they have the ability to do it, but they still have to pay you, and they have to pay you fair market value. Now they can start arguing about what's fair market value, but they can't argue that because the government now owns it, it has no value. But that's not true in the communist system. That they have the right. They don't have eminent domain over there because you don't have the right to own any property. The property is all owned by the government. You just have use rights, and they can take those use rights away at any time. And there's no obligation to pay you for those use rights because the property was theirs to start with. So they don't have any obligation to pay you anything. You were just being given the right to use it for some period of time, and that right can be taken away. So, and that's exactly what the Chinese government did to this 3rd plant. Even though it was breaking even and keeping people employed, they basically, were trying to take it over, and they were not going to pay anything for it. Fortunately, the owner of the company had some contacts over there from years and years, and it was able to negotiate a payment, although they haven't gotten one yet. And but here's what was interesting: the Chinese government, as part of this process, they took over this plant. They made them stop production so that it could be torn down. In fact, I think it was torn down, but they made them stop production. But the business had to continue to pay its labor for the next year, even though it wasn't making anything. As part of it, it had to pay labor for another year. Now, as an investor, I mean, you're gone. I mean, you get the heck out of there. And then, frankly, because it still wasn't finalized, they came back and wanted the business to pay another year. And since there was no business, so they decided to go after the president of the company, who was not the sole owner by any means, and get the president to pay. You got to pay then. It's your job. Well, I don't own it. Doesn't make a difference. You've got to pay. Fortunately, he got out of the country in time to avoid a disaster. Interesting side note: you hear the stuff that's going on in Singapore and in Hong Kong, and some of the things with with threats of bringing the people back to the mainland. And you'd say, well, what's the big deal? They bring it back. Well, one thing is you're not going to get a fair trial on the mainland. Uh, there is no fair trial required. They determine you're a traitor, you're dead. But it's but what also happens is it means that you may not be able to get out of the country, and here's why. We all hear of visas. So when you go into a country, you've got your passport, of course, but when you go into a country, a communist country, things like that, you got to have a visa, and that visa is issued by the country to allow you in. You can't just arbitrarily, wander into Cuba, for example, or China. So what a lot of people, China can control that by saying, we're not going to give you a visa. So if they want to keep somebody out of the country, they could do it by not giving them a visa. And then they don't have a right to come into the country. And that's when people think about, that's what they do with a visa. They're just not going to give you a visa, so you can't go there, so you can't go back and see your relatives or whatever. Now, they also, once they remove your visa, you can't leave the country. So if you're in China and they revoke your visa, you're kidnapped. You cannot leave. You just can't get out of the country. And that's how they threaten these people. And my client, that's exactly what happened, is that he got out quickly because he wasn't paying a year's worth of wages to people that he didn't have any money to pay. And so he got out of the country before they revoked his visa. But that's how they do it. And that's what the people in Hong Kong and Singapore, these are business people that travel all over the world, and and they have the ability to come and go, but not in mainland China. In mainland China, they have to have a visa, and so the government can withdraw that visa. Next thing you know, they're stuck. So those are the things that we're talking about. Some of the things that we're concerned about is what happens there. But in a, like I say, in a communist system, your labor is stuck there. Is really what it amounts to, and everything kind of collapses to the lowest level. You say, well, look at China. Well, China, first of all, China is what you see in China is different than what happens in China. You don't choose what job you do in China, and you don't get paid more, but you may have a better place to live because it demands it where you're working. So, for example, in Russia, the old saying was, you're going to get banned to Siberia. You get out there in the tundra and live out in the cold. So you still got the same amount of money. You just froze to death, and you were out in the middle of nowhere. In China, it's the farms. You get sent out to the farms. There's no productivity in the farms. They do not want productivity because they have a whole bunch of people that need something to do. So they're just the opposite of the example I was talking about the minimum wage increase and everything, where productivity eliminates the jobs. And they don't want that. They'll eliminate the productivity to create the job because they've got make work jobs. Labor is cheap for them because they've got to pay them no matter what. The people don't all have to work. They could stay home, but most people are forced to go in and work. They have to do some things. And so, what you end up having is cheap labor. I mean, really cheap labor. Think about that a minute. That is why productivity lags behind in communist and socialist countries, is there's no reason to do that. Labor is so cheap that there's no need to worry about productivity. That's why technology in many of these countries does not lead. That's why China steals technology instead of creating it in many cases. Why? Because they don't need the productivity that creates for their own economy, because it eliminates jobs that they need to produce or have so that they can have a justification for paying people the amount of money that they pay them and the stuff that they pay, that so that they have a reason for having them, make something, do something. They've got to produce something they can sell to create income for their economy, sell outside China. They have to have exports so that they can then, then they can use. Why are their prices cheaper? Well, because their prices are subsidized, and that's why, there was a lot of talk previously about tariffs, and tariffs usually diminish trade. Free trade is a good thing typically because it produces better prices and better products and better everything. Usually, like anything else, anything in the free market that works towards an equilibrium price produces a fair price, and therefore is a good thing. Anything that impairs that, like tariffs, results in results in a reduction of that, and produces an unfair price. It produces, inefficiencies, and so ultimately, that's what in a Chinese system, in the communist system, there is, there's no need to there's no need to produce those efficiencies. But also, like I said, the whole purpose of the government is to manage those resources, produce, and they can shift costs around to produce a price that they want. So, for example, I was talking about tariffs. Initially, normally tariffs are a bad thing, but if I've got a country that is producing products and their cost of their product is artificially subsidized by the government, then if I don't do anything, my country will end up with an unfair price. And so if, like I say, if I can produce a product like steel, let's say that I'm going to produce steel. Well, if I don't have the safety standards, and let's face it, the communist countries don't have OSHA. They could care less. And frankly, with their population, the fewer people, the better. That's why many of them have population control factors in there in terms of how many kids you can have and that kind of thing. But more importantly, if you die, you're not on the government toll anymore. It's as simple as that. So the more people that die, the more money there is for everybody else. Okay. That's just the cruel hard fact of the way that system works. It is a system based on eliminating the lowest common denominator price wise, and that's labor. So if you can reduce the supply of labor, then the money that you're paying is more. So ultimately, that's what happens, and because they can shift the cost of labor. For example, they can artificially, because everybody technically gets the same, they can artificially reduce the price of the labor and even the materials that it takes. They reduce the safety standards. They reduce the pollution standards. The fact that China is considered to be a developing nation for the purposes of the Paris Climate Accords, that's a huge advantage to them. If they don't have to worry about the environment, they don't have to worry about clean energy or anything like that, which they don't. Keep in mind, they don't. China is not like us. They don't have to do that. They're outside of that. They're considered a developing nation. Developing nations are under a different standard internationally for pollution. And they don't care about pollution. They don't care about the environment. If people die from it, it's a good thing in their system, a really good thing. So there's no concern about that. So now when you start reducing all those costs, certainly you can produce a price cheaper than we can do it in the United States, because we do care whether our people die. We do care about pollution. We do care about the efficiencies there. And we care about other things. We have products that we use that are produced under the same method. So that increases our costs. And so therefore our price is going to be higher. The only way you can compete with that is to regulate somehow China. China is not going to allow us to go in there and set their price other than through tariffs. That's what we do. And then we negotiate how much trade, because they do need our products, because they don't produce enough of certain products to survive. So they have to buy it from us. And therefore, they have to deal with those tariffs. The big thing is, because they do have so many people, they can't produce the way that they do things. They cannot produce the food that they need in to supply to all those people. So that's kind of where we're at with some of this stuff. The other thing that I think we're going to be looking at coming up here, and us, like I say, a lot of this stuff is conflicting. So, for example, when you, like I say, increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and then you allow immigration, so you allow a lot of people to come in who would certainly take that job at $15 an hour, would have gladly taken it at 10 or 8, but wanted it, but will gladly take it at 15. At that point, now we have this severe conflict in the labor pool, because we have workers who are being paid more than the job dictates. We have a lot of people that want the job, which would normally push that price back down, but the government has artificially stopped it. And when they do that, when they artificially stop it, something will happen. Like I say, it could be productivity issues like artificial intelligence, but most likely what happens is a lot of underground stuff. People start working off the books. People start getting, and especially when the taxes go up as well, because that's another thing we're going to see, is an increase in taxes. And it's all based on somebody that makes over 400,000. Well, there are a lot of people in the United States that make over 400,000 on a joint basis. You can say they're wealthy, but I don't think that they're so wealthy that they're sitting home doing nothing. And those aren't people clipping dividends. Those are people, most of which have small businesses that on paper show that they're making that kind of money, but they have to push the cash back in the business. So and that's what I've said over and over again. And most business people know this, small business in particular. There's a difference between profit and cash. It's not like your paycheck. If I make $300,000 in my business, I don't have $300,000 in cash, free cash that I could just pull out. It's not like that's the money that goes in my checking account every week because I made, it's because it's like my salary. No, that's not the way it works. Because I've got to leave money in there to pay the next payroll, because those people are already working. I've got to leave money in there to pay for the inventory items that I need, the materials, the supplies, the computers, and all of the things that I need to run that. I have to leave that money in. I have to pay tax on it because it all gets paid, and I have to pay tax on it, but I have to leave that money in. Now, eventually I get a deduction for it, but I'm still leaving the cash in. So it's important to understand that most small businesses, if they have 40% free cash, they're probably lucky. Generally, and that's kind of after taxes. So if I make $300,000, I'm probably pulling 120 that I could probably pull out as compensation. And I still probably have to pay taxes on that. So now, if all of a sudden the tax rate goes to so I'm reported 300, but I'm able to pull out 120. That's 40%. Well, at that point, all of my free cash is going to taxes. So there's no money left to pay me, and I don't get any cash. So I have to have more than that. So if the federal tax rate hits 40% or higher, pretty much the small business employer is working for the employees. They're getting no money out of the deal. They may be pulling out some benefits just to get by, but probably not. They're probably just getting by, because that's the way that works. Now, if you get up to big numbers, then there might be a little bit more free cash, but we're talking millions of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's kind of what we're looking at. I think we're going to see a lot of inefficiencies. In the past, when we have high tax rates, the reason that they don't convert to tax dollars is people shift the way they do things, even to the point of inefficiencies, because now we have an artificially high tax cost. So even if I do something that's slightly inefficient, on the other side, I may come out ahead in total because I've substantially reduced. And remember, taxes are costs. So I have to make it a profit. If my tax numbers go up, I have to find a way to reduce something else. That might be by creating artificial deductions, by purchasing things that I don't need, so I create an artificial deduction for it. It may be by laying people off. It may be by paying people outside the books, so I don't have to pay tax on it. It may be putting money in my pocket, so I don't have to pay. That's why. And then, of course, at that point, you now have a lot more IRS action. So now the administrative cost of our tax system becomes much higher because our tax system is based on voluntary participation. Nobody's looking at what you're putting on your tax return. It's voluntary participation. Yes, you could be audited, but we all know the chances of that are almost nil. Everything is electronic now. So if you prepare the return, even if it's not right, if you prepare the return so that it doesn't get triggered in an electronic audit, in an electronic review, then they're never going to catch you. And everybody knows that. And because everybody knows that, when taxes go up, the cost of collecting those taxes go up even higher. So that makes the cost of high taxes even higher because people find ways to not report it. And they don't report it. And they justify it by saying, well, this isn't right, so I'm just not paying my fair share because my fair share is more than your fair share, and it's unfair. And so they pay people like me to come up with ridiculous strategies to save the money, which I will. I'll probably make some more money when this goes into effect because I will have people do a lot of crazy stuff that will save them tax money. And that's what they'll have to do. That's what they'll want to do because the person that does it best will win in this scenario. So it's not about being efficient anymore. It's about how you move the cards. And I'm not saying you do anything illegal. I'm not going to do anything illegal. So don't come to me for that. But I can help you do a lot of stuff that will help you postpone or avoid these taxes, including helping you move offshore if you need to do that. That's what's going to happen with a lot of our capital. It's going to move offshore. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go. As things start to materialize, we'll start discussing that, getting it out there and talking about it. Hopefully you'll join us on Wednesdays right here from 9 to 10 o'clock on Treasure Coast Solutions. And thanks for joining us today right here on WSTU 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.